The People's National Congress Reform, PNCR, presents Nation Watch.
Opposition, I would now call on you to make your presentation. Honorable Leader of the Opposition, we start the clock at 3:51.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister ended on a note that is very apt to him. No one can pour truth in your brain. You have to find it yourself. Let me remind you that when the PNC left government in 1992, there was money in the budget to build the Soesdijk-Linden Highway, which the PPP government took away and used in other places. That is a truth. Mr. Speaker, I do not know if the word joker is unparliamentary. Could you tell me so I don't use it as a means of description of the PM? I could?
A joke is well taken, and I have made quite a few in the House.
Okay.
A joke.
Yes, Mr.
But
Speaker.
calling people jokers is like...
Well, it must have been a joke for the Prime Minister to sit there and say that you built a COVID-19 hospital and you didn't invite people. Who will tour at a time of COVID hospital? It's just open. Mr. Speaker, it makes absolutely no sense. The government might have allowed you to tour if it was the PPP because they won't get rid of you. Mr. Speaker, I had to shift from my text to deal with the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister tries to go on like if he has some affiliation to Linden. It is only when he became Prime Minister you began to return to Linden. And that is a fact. I have been in contact and in Linden continuously. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister spoke about us not having a national youth conference and council. We did, right in this building. And emerging from it after consultation was a youth policy that still exists while your government has none. And so, Mr. Speaker, I believe the script that you would have given turned out to be an embarrassment for you. Who, Mr. Speaker, will come here knowing that in under 5 years, the APNU AFC increased workers' wages by more than 70% and make the kind of statement you would have made? Mr. Speaker, it is one thing to come here, Mr. Prime Minister, and tell us about the gas to shore energy plan and the money. But you can't tell us until now, how much it will cost and what will be the cost for the electricity for the consumer. If you fail to do that, then you are wasting our time. There is much more I wanted to say, but the Prime Minister, in the face of fact, ran. I don't like talking behind people's back, and so I will reserve it for when I catch him again. Mr. Speaker, I move away from the protocols to deal with the Prime Minister, but I want to say a special thank you to all the members of Parliament in the opposition side. They have critiqued this budget in a way that the people of Guyana have long concluded that this budget does not cater for them. Mr. Speaker, I believe as well that we have done exceptionally well, because when the Honorable Vince Roy Jordan spoke about what happened in Region 5, the government went and had them giddy up. And so they worked from Wednesday after the budget until now, rectifying the problems. The people of Region 5 asked me to say thanks to the Member of Parliament who raised it, and for the first time, some responsiveness from the government. Mr. Speaker, as we speak, as the Prime Minister talks about the love for Linden, I wonder if he knows that right now, Linden has a water crisis. Correct. And the people of Linden are not getting water. He needs to go and check. That is the reality. Mr. Speaker, I'm sorry the Honorable Warner Jill, W-O-N-E or O-N-E, isn't here. But I brought to Parliament the state of Prince William Street, the street I am living in. He stood in this house and told this house that that street was completed. Mr. Speaker, I will circulate it. That street is terrible. And we need to check to see what happened with the money that they purportedly paid the contractor. There's another piece of information that is distant from the truth, since I can't say lie. The Honorable Minister in the Ministry of the Finance said that in 1992 they inherited a state-dominated economy. May I remind him, so that the facts can prevail, that you, Desmond Hoyt, had divested most of the state enterprises, and when they came to power, Guyana's economy was on the way to liberalization. Mr. Speaker, you know, Parliament is supposed to be a place where the government comes, it puts its budget. We then come and we critique the budget. And then we expect the ministers in responding to respond to the criticisms. That is not what is happening here. The ministers come to cuss, abuse. We are going to continue to lift the standards of this parliament. Mr. Speaker, the focus of development in Guyana must be our people. It is my intention today to outline the APNU-AFC people-centered vision of development for the people of Guyana. Our people-centered vision will be implemented under the theme in pursuit of stronger, integrated, and inclusive development to guarantee a high quality of life for all Guyanese people. This becomes necessary since this budget is a disaggregated set of projects with no clear philosophy underpinning it. The 2023 budget can never deliver a high quality of life to our people. While infrastructure development is needed, this budget is structured to focus on infrastructure at the expense of the development of our people. We cannot condone that. Such an approach is a mechanism to place the nation's resources in the hands of the wealthy and those who have no interest in legality, since I can't use the word corrupt, at the expense of the poor and vulnerable who really should be the main beneficiaries of our resources. This budget, Mr. Speaker, will see the rich getting richer and the poor getting poorer. Mr. Speaker, we are operating in real terrible times. Our people-centered development strategy recognizes the need to solve the problems of our society at various levels. They must be dealt with at the level of the individual, the family, the community, and the national and international levels. We need a holistic approach to deal with our problems. This piecemeal approach will not solve our problems. It is for this reason, Mr. Speaker, men on mission is ill-conceived. It assumes that the problem to be solved will be solved by men on a mission. It has to be solved by men, women, boys, and girls, and institutions working together to eradicate poverty, restore law and order, and developing new humane values that allow our society to progress, while at the same time being inclusive, respecting the rule of law and promoting a democratic culture, a culture which eludes the PPP regime. Good governance is needed, but cannot be achieved because the PPP is hell-bent on controlling, dominating every aspect of the lives of the people of Guyana. So to use my good friend Ramjatan, they are control freaks. Mr. Speaker, no society can progress when a culture of barbarism is the order of the day. The bulldozing and destroying of the homes of innocent Guyanese at Caneview, Mocha, is a clear indication that this government is not committed to human rights and the rule of law. The PPP has committed a heinous crime against the people of Mocha. The barbarism that characterized the PPP regime is a new low in the treatment of the poor and dispossessed in our society. Correct. The PPP has lost whatever links it has to humanity. It has none at present. I believe the PPP will pay dearly at the polls for this heinous crime they committed on innocent people. Correct. And this is more so once we get a clean voters list. It is opposite at this time for me to respond to the Minister of Housing. It is true that as leader of the opposition, I asked Kamaganish Maipol to make contact with Mr. Crowell, and he did. The explanation he gave here is not the best reflection of the reality. When he was contacted, he told Mr. Maipol, and he communicated it to me, that the decision was taken above him and he can do nothing about it. Why come to this house and give a totally different impression?
Everything is done above him. Everything is done above him.
Mr. Speaker, I believe that it was the intention to do what they did, excuse me, at Caneview. And so it is part of their modus operandi. Remember, ropes and bend the hammer man. Mr. Speaker, this budget does not take a holistic approach to Guyana's development. It is the bringing together of different, sometimes unrelated projects with the hope that it will result in national development. It will not. We need to recognize that there's a new dispensation in Guyana. We have finances at this stage from oil and gas. We must note that. The significant difference between the PPP and the AP and UAFC in government is the existence of oil resources for development. There is no sense in comparing 2015 to 2020, where there were no resources from oil, and 2020 to now. What must be stated is that there are the resources to do what we are asking to be done.
Correct.
Unfortunately, the PPP seems not disposed to investing in our people. We will invest in our people.
Correct.
We in the APNU AFC, we in the APNU AFC will pursue this strategy of ensuring our policies, programs, and projects are geared to improve the quality of life of our people. That is why we named it a people-centered program. We believe that a sine qua non for development is the development of our human resources. We will focus on developing our human resources. I turn to human resource development. Mr. Speaker, human resource development is one of the most important subjects to be dealt with by a developing country. We need to develop our human resource capabilities in all sectors. We need to develop our human resource capabilities to be able to monitor and audit cost oil so as to allow us to garner more at the level of profits for the investment in our people. The resources garnered from oil must therefore be spent to improve our human resource capabilities. A survey needs to be done to determine the human resource needs of all sectors in our economy and the requisite action taken to ensure we develop our own resource capabilities in a way that is determined by the needs of our society rather than the training program on offer by others. It is the needs of the society that should determine the training and scholarship we deliver. We have no problems with goal, but it must be structured to serve our society. Mr. Speaker, this might be the biggest budget in terms of resource allocation. Unfortunately, the resources are badly allocated. It is one of the smallest budgets in terms of allocation of resources to the people, since it is focused on putting resources in the hands of the rich. We in the APNU AFC commit ourselves to deliver a high quality of life to the people of Guyana, utilizing innovative measures and people-centered program as we utilize the oil resources that our country has been blessed with. Mr. Speaker, we will implement a plan and not continue like this government to pull projects from the sky as this government continues to do. Poverty alleviation and eradication are two important objectives we set ourselves. Spending money to facilitate illegal activities cannot be a viable strategy. In other circumstances, I would have said corruption, but I can't.
Honorable Leader of the Opposition, the third time you tried to be very skillful in introducing unparliamentary words. So I know you're skillful enough to now desist.
I turn to poverty alleviation and eradication. The critical task before us is to develop a strategy to alleviate and ultimately eradicate poverty, since poverty is one of the key causes of our many social and other problems. The government has to accept this as a fact, or else they'll continue to be in deep trouble. Unfortunately, Budget 2023 has no such strategy. Mr. Speaker, APNU AFC wishes to recommend the following measures to deal with the high levels of poverty in Guyana. We will identify, one, the communities with high levels of poverty. Two, we will conduct a national poverty survey to further understand poverty in Guyana. Based on this survey, we will determine what is the minimum livable income and ensure those in poverty earn a minimum livable income. Three, we will educate those in poverty in financial literacy and small business management with the aim of giving them grants and loans to enable them to establish micro and small businesses. Four, ensure that our people are literate. Our education system needs to return to the fundamentals and to ensure that by the time a child arrives in grade 3, they can read, write, count, comprehend, and reason. In this regard, Mr. Speaker, our education system has failed our people, especially our young people. One of the prerequisites for poverty alleviation and eradication is the development of a literate and functioning society. We will pursue that. We need a literate society, and our resources need to be placed into ensuring this objective is achieved. Cognizant of the new technological era in which we live, Mr. Speaker, illiteracy contributes to poverty and must be eradicated. 5, develop projects in impoverished communities to lift them out of poverty using both job creation and the promotion of micro and small businesses. We will train for employment in both the private and the public sector. 6, we must remove income tax from all those living below the poverty line. No one earning below $150,000 should be paying personal income tax in this oil-rich country. This budget illustrates that the burden of tax paying is on the small man who is poor and vulnerable. Most of the taxes are coming from personal income tax. It's unacceptable and it is unfair. 7, the use of salary top-ups to bring Guyanese above the minimum livable income. 8, the provision to students of $50,000 per month to attend our tertiary institutions. Ghana School of Agriculture, Technical Institutes, UG, inter alia. Special scholarships for the children of the poor who are capable. Mr. Speaker, this is dear to many of us who might not have been in this house had the PNC not put in place a system that allowed poor people to realize their potential. We must make technical and vocational training available to the poor and their children. 11, the provision of increased public assistance to the poor and their children. Clearly, $2,000 increase in public assistance is ridiculous. It is unacceptable, as it is unbelievable. What is worse is the arbitrary way in which a minister can take away that assistance. It is in such circumstance that the APNUFC government will establish objective criteria for the allocation of public assistance. It cannot be at the whims fancies, and caprices of a minister. We will reduce VAT to 12% so that it will ease the pressure on the poor. We'll develop a network of early childhood education centers and systems to help single parents and the poor in general. I invite members of this House to go to poor communities and see women departing and leaving their children to go to do security work with no protection for them. This society owes it to them to develop a system of early childhood education centers. We have to get special training for the poor and vulnerable. Mr. Speaker, Guyana needs a program to house the homeless. Guyana needs a program to house the homeless. Mr. Speaker, I invite anyone in here to drive Regent Street at night and see the amount of people sleeping on the pavement in oil-rich Guyana. Unacceptable. 16, develop a more all-encompassing nutritious school feeding program to alleviate childhood malnutrition will be done. We'll implement a national school children transportation program to take our children to school, be it on land or river. It is not enough to come here to criticize the 5Bs, where without oil resources, from the assistance of people, not government money, we were providing boats, bicycles. You come here to criticize it, rather than appear to be a government that concerned and come proposing a network of transportation that will allow our children to get to school and ensure that that burden is not on their parents. 18, we will build sustainable communities, meaning communities with high quality educational, health, recreation, and other modern facilities, potable water, electricity, roads, and proper drainage that are necessities if the communities to develop and not a farcical silica city. Mr. Speaker, why would we be fighting with highfalutin schemes? When we came to power in 2015, we had to put light in farm, roads in farm, virtually every area. We have many so-called housing schemes that do not have the basic facilities, but the government comes to tell us about Silica City. Let us make the cities of poor people the same level of Silica City that you envisage. 19, the development of these communities will demand trained social workers, psychologists, and other professionals, and a reorientation of law enforcement to understand and deal with the many social problems confronting our communities, Mr. Speaker, we teach our teachers to teach. We teach policemen to enforce laws, but we fail to give them the professional training needed to deal with the social problems of this modern era. Our teachers, medical workers, and our police inter alia have to be re-educated to face the many social problems confronting our society. Mr. Speaker, the APNU-AFC aim is to develop sustainable communities with informed citizens that are law-abiding and committed to the development of a Guyana that is free from ethnic prejudice. We want our people to live and work together. Merely saying one Guyana cannot solve the problem. To this end, we have to root out the illegalities and lawlessness that characterize our society. Lawless societies do not develop. As we pursue the development of sustainable communities, we must keep in mind the aim of reducing the gap between town and rural areas and the coast and hinterland. Our people-centered vision is aimed at giving all people, wherever they are, a high quality of life. That is what we must pursue. In indigenous communities, sustainability must mean that our indigenous people must be trained and financed to be able to take on construction and other contracts in their communities. While our indigenous people need a fish, it is more important to teach them to fish and share in our national patrimony in a more meaningful way. All communities, including indigenous communities, must be made self-sustainable communities. 20, we will promote community development and local leadership to unleash the talents and energies of our people in communities. In this regard, we will promote local democracy and take action to remove party politics from local development and allow local authorities to function in keeping with the law and the needs of the people in their communities. Mr. Speaker, there is too much domination and control from the center. Mr. Speaker, this approach of domination and control of local democratic organs constitute a fetter to development.
Correct.
21, Mr. Speaker, on that side, they talk all the time about house lots. 20,000 house lots, 50,000 house lots. Mr. Speaker, while house lots are on offer, many Guyanese cannot afford to build. House lots and housing are not the same. The APNU AFC will offer poor and vulnerable Guyanese the option to be part of a rent-to-own scheme. This will remove the need for poor Guyanese to have to find large sums to get a mortgage and will make home ownership more accessible to the poor and vulnerable. Mr. Speaker, their rent will go towards payment for their house. Such an initiative will allow the poor to own their houses without having to fund a percentage of the mortgage as is usual. Mr. Speaker, in other countries, rent to own contributed significantly to poor people obtaining homes. There's no sense telling us you reduce this and you reduce that, and then the money that the person has to find, they cannot find. The best option is rent to own. We advocate that. We will expand the funding for the Small Business Bureau to facilitate youth, women, single mothers, and other vulnerable Guyanese. The provision of grants and credits to the unemployed to facilitate their involvement in agriculture and agro-processing will be undertaken. This measure will go a far way in improving production and will bring down the high cost of living, thus reducing inflation and positively impacting the pockets of poor Guyanese. Mr. Speaker, we cannot wish poverty away. Cash grants, though needed and welcome, cannot take our people out of poverty. We need measures like the above mentioned to address poverty. I know they all would have left because they keep saying we don't offer solutions. I've just given them 22 solutions. As they sit enjoying taxpayers' money and eating, I hope they listen and implement. Mr. Speaker, it is this kind of visionary thinking that Guyana needs, and not the pasting together of projects to facilitate illegal practices for the governing elite, family, friends, and favorites. That is not what we need. Mr. Speaker, while we seek to eradicate poverty, we must at the same time deal with the high cost of living. This budget is found wanting when it comes to measures aimed at addressing the high cost of living. This budget, Mr. Speaker, rehashes the same old measures that were announced in 2022 that failed to bring down the cost of living. The rehashing of them is a clear indication that the drafters of this budget have no clue of what needs to be done to stabilize and ultimately reduce cost of living. Mr. Speaker, all Guyanese should know that if this government was serious, they would have had relief measures in this budget for cost of living. Mr. Speaker, we wish to propose a raft of measures to mitigate the high cost of living. These measures will include, among others, 1, vouchers for those in public transportation so that they can have access to lower gasoline prices. This is important because transportation contributes. 2, the waiver of electricity charges for low-income Guyanese. 3, the waiver of water charges for low-income Guyanese. 4, grants of 5 million or more to small businesses based on objective criteria so that they can expand production. And when production expands at the local level, prices stabilize and eventually come down. So it deals with inflation. The distribution based on equity of the excess $60 billion Guyana received from last year's unexpectedly high oil prices, which translates into $300,000 per household. 6, a minimum of 50% wages and salary increase for all public servants. 8% is not enough to impact the cost of living. The inflation would have eaten away at that already, and therefore the real wage of the Guyanese worker is less this year. Writing off of UG student loans and fees to free up disposable incomes for families. Mr. Speaker, this can be done now. It doesn't have to wait until 2025. We have the resources. It would be remiss of me, Mr. Speaker, if I don't remind this House that Guyana did it without oil, with more poverty in the 70s, 80s, until the PPP terminated it in the 1990s. Mr. Speaker, another critical issue for us to address is the question of unemployment and underemployment. While we welcome citizens who have no jobs obtaining $50,000 a month, this is not the solution to unemployment. It might be useful to the government as a tool for bribery and control, but it's also a manifestation that the government has failed in its quest to provide jobs, especially good-paying jobs for our young people. Mr. Speaker, we need not just to create employment, but to produce jobs that are high-paying and allowing our people to have a livable income and a decent life. We know that this budget is short on creating employment that allows our people to live decent and comfortable lives. Mr. Speaker, we wish to recommend the following measures for our people-centered vision that will result in the creation of employment for our people and redound to the benefit of our people, especially our youth. Our policies to generate high-paying jobs are as follows. 1, taxes for agro-processing and other manufacturing with competitive advantage should be removed, allowing technologically advanced, high-paying manufacturing to take its place. 2, a national productivity bank should be created to offer low-interest loans to medium to large-scale businesses to facilitate job creation and expansion. We know that the private sector has repeatedly complained about high business interest rates. We must address it. 3, the Small Business Bureau should be massively expanded and properly managed with millions of dollars grant that allows small businesses to develop, bring new products to the market, and otherwise expand. This should be accessible to all Guyanese. Mr. Speaker, in collaboration with ExxonMobil and its partners, extensive oil and gas training should be offered to allow Guyanese to access jobs in that industry. Training at Port Morant alone is inadequate. There are many other institutions across Guyana that must be utilized to train our people. 5, guaranteed high-paying government jobs. I repeat, guaranteed high-paying government jobs. In this regard, university graduates must be employed to undertake analyses of our problems and offer solutions resulting in development being data-driven. Mr. Speaker, there are many university students out there who would have graduated and cannot find a job. If the government undertakes to create proper think tanks and working bodies and pay people to do the research, etc., we'll be in a better position. 6, grant must be made available for new people in agriculture and for existing farmers to ensure increased agricultural activity as a measure to prevent us from experiencing the Dutch disease, which is at our front door. These grants to farmers will allow them to boost productivity, grow their farms, and increase their earnings by acquiring better equipment. It will contribute to the development of the non-oil sector. 7, construction jobs will be created to facilitate the government's rent-to-own low-income housing schemes. 8, we will create construction jobs through a government infrastructure development program that builds modern homes and other facilities for teachers, health workers, and other public servants who have to serve away from their homes. All those public servants complain about how bad the facilities are. Mr. Speaker, MPs and local government representatives must be provided with well-paid staff to help them better respond to the needs of the Guyanese people and represent them. Well-paid teachers and training staff must be hired to facilitate evening training at government schools, whether for widely available adult education classes or technical ones. The restarting of the night school program, which began under the APN UFC, is a good starting point. Mr. Speaker, we must not be carried away by all of these top students. It is estimated that about 16,000 children do grade 6 or common entrance, but only about 5,000 matriculate, meaning they have 5 CXC with math and English, and then the system dumps them rather than developing an evening school and night school so that they can return and make themselves eligible to work and train. Funding for community development and the creation of livable spaces throughout Guyana will create hundreds of jobs in design and construction. 12, cheaper electricity from power sources such as solar energy will facilitate job creation through various forms of value-added manufacturing. This will be prevalent in designated industrial zones in all regions. The foregoing must be done while simultaneously taking measures to reduce inflation. In this regard, as you would have recognized, many of the measures contribute to dealing with inflation. Mr. Speaker, the government clearly does not have a plan. I want to turn to manufacturing. Mr. Speaker, this budget lacks measures to contribute to the development of the non-oil sector. The government seems to be a little boy flicking and hoping he lands on his feet rather than his head. Mr. Speaker, tax breaks must be targeted, not scattergun. When it comes to industrial policy, they are vital in specific circumstances, like stimulating industries that face challenges in starting up and scaling. To this end, we call on the government to reduce the corporate tax rate for non-commercial businesses involving in agro-processing to 0%. Additional categories of manufacturing should also be assessed and incorporated in this policy based on their competitive advantage. Further, these incentives should be coupled with the grants to farmers we have previously proposed to help them to expand production to meet the expected increased demand for produce. These targeted policies in the agro-processing industry will stimulate activities such as the canning of fruits and vegetables or the production of juices and similar natural beverage for export. Further, this policy approach will ensure benefits are not concentrated in one or two regions for selfish political gains, but spread nationally to encourage development wherever conditions are suitable. This will swiftly generate tens of thousands of jobs as international manufacturers are attracted to Guyana, much the same as they have flocked similar low-tax nations. We do not need to wait for low electricity price, which may never materialize, to see manufacturing grow in Guyana. This is even more so, since the project for cheap electricity is in hands of the second vice president of Sioux fame, who presided over the most failed projects in the history of Guyana. Instead, we should learn from those nations which have leveraged thoughtful tax policy to stimulate export industries. Mr. Speaker, I want to read for you a passage from a Brown University paper, and I have it there to lay over, that describes the benefits of targeted, sizable tax breaks, as opposed to the scattergun approach the PPP uses to reward its cronies. It concerns Operation Bootstrap, which Puerto Rico established all the way back in the 1940s, and which formed the ideological backbone of the effective industrial policies of dozens of countries and special economic zones. I quote, "Perhaps the economic measure most important to Operation Bootstrap success was the tax exemption policy for US and other corporations that invested in the island. Industrial growth in the island after 1947 suggests that the tax exemption program was successful. In 1949, the United States Department of Commerce estimated that 1,998 manufacturing establishments in Puerto Rico employed 55,000 Puerto Ricans, with an average workforce of 27.6 persons by 1967. 2,367 manufacturing establishments employed 121,537 Puerto Ricans, with an average of 51.3 per establishment. Puerto Rican country, the Department of Commerce valued manufacturing in Puerto Rico $1 million. By 1967, $21 million for the island. Evidently, Operation Bootstrap successfully industrialized the island. Perhaps more importantly, it successfully shifted Puerto Rican economy's dependence from agriculture to industry in less than 20 years. That is what Guyana needs. Shifting Guyana's economy from agriculture to this type of value-added industrial production has been a goal of Guyanese development policy for decades. The Honorable Speaker will tell you since we were in youth politics, we were talking about that, but it eludes us. Under the coalition, we began this process by reducing the tax rate for non-commercial businesses to 25%. We must continue to reduce taxes in a targeted way to create tens of thousands of jobs. The PPP has not figured out these types of tax policies. After being in office, that the PPP has not figured out these types of tax policies after being in power for 25 of the last thinking, poor historical knowledge, and fundamental inability to create jobs. We promise you that as a government, we will create the jobs, and we have given you the mechanisms to do it. I turn to the public service. According to the World Bank, 25% in 2023. The government cannot continue to present a country where public servants must scrape and toil. Even more as government revenues surge and government's programs grow in scale and complexity. We reiterate our call for all public servants to be given 50% increase in wages and salaries. However, public servants' compensation must extend beyond just salary increases. We must empower public servants with the best possible facilities to make them effective. We must empower them with professional training so that they can improve their productivity and advance their careers. Additionally, we call on the government to extend duty-free concession for vehicles to a larger group of public servants. Mr. Speaker, since I was a public servant, whenever I became one in the 70s, it has remained the same group virtually. We want to make it clear that we consider public servants to be vital to Guyana's development and will do everything in our power to support them. We will professionalize the public service as we did when we were in government. Public servants can tell you they operated with much more freedom between 2015 and 2020 than they operate now. They live a life of fear. On the other hand, Mr. Speaker, Guyana labor needs serve as the backdrop for another lie we must not let stand. At the United Nations last year, the president boasted that spending on education will be increased to 20% of the budget. That works out to $156.4 billion this year. It may be obvious to everyone in this esteemed house that your education budget this year is not $156.4 billion. In fact, the government has missed its target by $62 billion, a truly monumental sum. What love for the public. The PPP does not believe in education. In the same way that they never intended to spend 20% of the budget on that ministry. If they had intended to do so, the University of Guyana would have been free. Billions would have been provided to upgrade the university. Lecturers and teachers would have received a 50% pay increase, and tens of thousands of students would have been receiving student stipends. Even further, the APNUAFC will implement a student stipend policy. We could easily afford to provide 50,000 students with $50,000 a month to assist them with educational expenses. That will also contribute to poverty alleviation. These stipends, Mr. Speaker, which should go to the students of the University of Guyana, TVET, night school, and other such institutions, will also incentivize Guyanese to train or retrain in order to build a robust workforce we require. Mr. Speaker, it is very important for us to give our students stipends. Mr. Speaker, when I was presidential advisor for youth empowerment, we did a survey. And we found that when children were close to the institution, whether it's GTI, NATI, or way, they tend to stay in the institution. But when they have to travel and face the courts, they fall out. We need to begin to help them to be able to not only go to school, but to stay in school. This policy, which we call 50 for 50, represent the type of serious initiatives that will help to energize and mobilize Guyana's youth. We must recognize that Guyana's change in economy provides change in opportunities, and that we have a sworn duty to help Guyanese seize these opportunities. I turn to infrastructure. Guyana needs a sound infrastructure development plan. While we see the need for the development of community roads, our infrastructure development plan must see us developing roads and bridges linking all 10 regions. Such developments will not only open new lands, they will also give us the opportunity to shift our economic and other activities to highlands and reduce our vulnerability to climate change. Guyana needs to shift its development to highlands. It must be the irony of the century that this just theme is, and I quote, improving lives today, building prosperity tomorrow, while the government continues to promote the bulk of development on the low coastal lying areas with all that this portends. Mr. Speaker, how could we say we're catering for the future, knowing the situation with climate change? Mr. Speaker, common sense and the fact that it's predicted that our coasts will be inundated by 2030, we must reduce the focus on the low-lying coast and begin to shift to highlands. Clearly, this budget is not building prosperity tomorrow. It is increasing our vulnerableness to climate change. It is a visionless budget. Mr. Speaker, it is opposite to point out that this regime continues to pursue development on the low-lying coastal plain at a time when they themselves are talking about climate change. Mr. Speaker, to shift our economic activities to the highlands will not only allow us to deal with climate change, it will also increase opportunities for ecotourism, since it will open new hinterland lands and expose Guyana's natural beauty to Guyanese and the world. It is well known that many Guyanese cannot see Guyana because they can't afford it. We need to change that. Since this move will facilitate a cheaper avenue for Guyana to explore and experience our beautiful country. Our infrastructure development must be based on a plan that opens Guyana's hinterland, reduces the need for expansive and expensive drainage system, while offering new, more safe and secure lands to our people. Our highlands offer such an opportunity. Mr. Speaker, people follow infrastructure. And if we continue to focus on the coast, we are ourselves contributing to making us more vulnerable to the ill effects of climate change. Mr. Speaker, all larger infrastructure programs must of necessity have proper feasibility studies and environmental impact assessment. We have lost too much under the PPP government by being involved in projects such as the Skeldon Sugar Modernization Project, the e-government project, fiber optic cable project, and the Enmore packaging plant, among the many failed projects under the Jack Dale PPP regime as a result of lack of proper feasibility studies. I turn to housing. The shift to the highlands will open new vistas for housing, business, and access to new freshwater resources, building materials, and the increased safety of our people away from the threat that the sea level rise poses. We are blessed with highlands. We need to reimagine Guyana and unleash its potential in the interest of all the people of Guyana. Such a shift, Mr. Speaker, will place us closer to our many waterfalls with hydropower potential and therefore reduce the cost of transmission of power to distant places. Mr. Speaker, as we conceptualize housing, let us focus on new sustainable communities as we seek to house our people. The APNU-AFC will implement a hinterland development program which will be guided by a well-thought-out land use policy. At present, Mr. Speaker, we put anything anywhere. We need a land use policy, so we choose the best places for housing, the best places for agriculture, the best places for manufacturing. You cannot wake up the next morning and say, oh, I feel like putting it here. Mr. Speaker, I turn to agriculture. Agriculture has to continue to be critical in the development of Guyana. It must play a pivotal role in providing food for our people. In this regard, Mr. Speaker, the APNU-AFC will promote agricultural development in every region as part of a wider plan to ensure all regions are self-sufficient in food production. This will go a far way in reducing the amount of money regions spent on transportation and will also result in the reduction of food prices in those regions and are therefore anti-inflationary and will redound to the benefit of the people of Guyana. Why would we, Mr. Speaker, be heading food security in the Caribbean region without food security in our 10 administrative regions? Mr. Speaker, charity begins at home. An APNU-AFC government will focus on food security in every region, and the excess from those regions can go to the Caribbean regional security. Mr. Speaker, as a concomitant of our regional agricultural development, we need corresponding agro-processing facilities in every region. Mr. Speaker, basic economics teaches that location matters. It is therefore mind-boggling when the Honorable Member from Region 6 indicated that they will place the agro-processing center at one extreme of the region. I think it's either Skeldon or Corriverton, forcing those at the other extreme to incur high costs to get to the agro-processing center. Mr. Speaker, an APNU-AFC government will strategically place these agro-processing facilities so that all can access them at relatively cheap costs. There has to be little or no thinking gone into that we put it at the other extreme. And more importantly, Mr. Speaker, it is well established in this country that the east bank of Berbice has some of the most fertile lands. Why would you put it at another end? I turn to oil. Mr. Speaker, if at the end of this year, Guyana never puts another FPSO into use, we would still be one of the highest oil producers per capita in the entire world. We would be producing easily 4 times as much oil per day as Ghana, 10 times as much as Trinidad and Tobago, and far more than Equatorial Guinea, to which we have often been compared. We cannot continue to operate like novices who have no idea of how an oil industry should be properly managed. Our sectoral committee on natural resources should be constantly engaged in reviewing the laws and regulations that govern this industry. Our public accounts committee must keep the industry under constant scrutiny. Our auditing capacity at both the GRA and the Auditor General offices should be expanded until it is the envy of the oil producing world. Our national university should be placed on the path to become one of the foremost oil and gas focused learning institutions worldwide. That is the kind of ambition we need to have. Critical issues in the oil and gas sector need to be under constant scrutiny. We cannot continue to have it mismanaged in the head of the incompetent second vice president. We need to ask the following questions.
Another beep.
to, it's incompetent you're talking about?
Yes.
Okay, withdrawn. We need to ask the following questions. What are estimates for the oil price next month, much less next year? How many shipments do we estimate we will receive this year, accounting for fluctuation in daily production volume? How many further oil finds do we expect this year, accounting for the number of exploration activities and our internal estimates of the probability of success? We need to do this kind of analysis. While we welcome ExxonMobil investment in Guyana, we cannot throw our hands up in the air and hope against hope that ExxonMobil will run its operation effectively and transparently. The government still seems to be in awe of the oil major and any oil company that comes to Guyana, completely unaware that world-class expertise can be imported to help Guyana effectively govern this sector. The Department of Energy under the coalition made steps in the right direction that we need to build on. Instead, we are asked to place our faith in a man who has failed perpetually. Mr. Speaker, these oversights, Mr. Speaker, after all, incompetence does not prevent the government from releasing the long overdue audit of $7 billion in cost recovery expenses. Incompetence does not prevent the government from releasing the full model PSA for scrutiny. No, Mr. Speaker, this is the work of a malicious intent to hide from public scrutiny and accountability. It has gotten to the point that when it comes to oil, the government is viewed with extreme suspicion by even the most moderate names. Mr. Speaker, when I mentioned Equatorial Guinea earlier, it was not done idly. That country is famous for monumental levels of secrecy and corruption. Sue, who leveled accusations of bribery in Guyana, even mentioning an oil deal, would fit right in that scheme. But Equatorial Guinea is not just corrupt, it is poor.
Honorable Leader of the Opposition, you're taking a lot of liberties, right? And yes, and the other issue was imputing for the 1.6, which has often been quoted. That's why I stopped you previously, right? Good.
That country is famous for having a GDP per capita that rivals many European countries, while 70% of its people live in desperate poverty. Guyana resembles Equatorial Guinea more and more every day, with more than half of Guyanese living in poverty, while the PPP elites, friends, family, and favorites gorge themselves. Foreign investment. We believe that foreign investment must be encouraged as we continually aim to diversify the Guyanese economy. We believe that a combination of foreign investment and local private sector growth can help us to build robust industries throughout our country. A dynamic local business environment must also provide space for small and medium-scale enterprises. Youth, sport, and culture. Mr. Speaker, we see culture, sport, and entertainment as critical to national identity. The development of the tourism industry and our goal of a comfortable, happy society. We must cherish and promote local culture and cultural events, celebrate our nation's history, and welcome tourists who come to share in our society's beauty. This renewed focus on what we are proud of in Guyana will help to bring Guyanese together and promote social cohesion. We do not believe that cultural erasure, which the PPP is practicing by ignoring matrimony, is the way forward for Guyana. It is now about 1 month from matrimony, and we have not heard almost anything about our country's most cherished annual celebrations. Resources should be invested to promote local tradition, artists, and craft, with matrimony front and center. Similarly, the PPP sees Guyana sports as unserious and unimportant, except for partisan political gains. We know that Guyanese are blessed with physical talents of many flavors, and we must set ourselves goals that match those talents as well as considerable resources. How many podium finishes is the Ministry of Culture, Youth and Sports targeting this year and over the next 5 years? Do they even contemplate such deliberate goals? All they do is keep telling us about grounds, most of which they haven't completed. Each community should have spaces for entertainment so that local artists can perform, art be displayed and sold, and citizens engage in relaxation. In the course of developing multiple avenues for entertainment, we will seek innovative ways to enable our artists, folklorists, singers, and writers to pursue their craft. Mr. Speaker, the APNU will give youth sport and culture the attention it needs to contribute to the development of Guyana and a rounded personality. I turn to foreign policy. At the international level, it is necessary that an international environment is created that is conducive to Guyana's development. Unfortunately, the Minister of Foreign Affairs seems not to understand his role, or is just incompetent and clearly lacks the intellectual sagacity that is needed to formulate.
I won't allow you to impute 416 on the Honorable Minister of Foreign Affairs.
The Minister of Foreign Affairs lacks the intellectual sagacity that is needed to formulate and implement foreign policy. You would agree, Mr. Speaker, that it demands nimbleness of mind. The honorable member, Mr. Todd, should stop embarrassing himself and resign. Mr. Speaker, Guyana foreign policy needs to create an environment for Guyana to progress. The discovery of oil has opened new vistas for Guyana, while simultaneously eventuating in new challenges. These challenges must be addressed and surmounted. As the world moves towards new and renewable energy, we need to pursue these energy options while simultaneously promoting a foreign policy strategy that gives us environmental space to develop our oil and gas sector, while at the same time pursuing sustainable development. In this regard, the existence of a large forest cover must not only be used in transactional terms, but also as a bargaining tool to give us the environmental space to develop our resources. That is the work of the Minister of Foreign Affairs. At the foreign policy level, Mr. Speaker, we need to engage the developed world and remind them that we have agreed to be guided by the principle of, and I quote, shared but differentiated responsibility, unquote, and to argue for environmental space to permit Guyana to develop its oil and gas resources. The Minister of Foreign Affairs, it is in this context, Mr. Speaker, that we need to forge relationships with countries to help us to benefit significantly from our oil and gas resources. The ministry needs to recognize that many developed countries that are rich, including the USA and the UK, are seeking more benefits from oil companies, and therefore the opportunity should be taken to craft a foreign policy strategy for us to benefit from this confluence of interest and allow Guyanese to obtain the support of the other countries, including developed countries, as we seek to benefit from our oil resources. Mr. Speaker, I have outlined a lot, and I just want to make one last major point. It was said here that we did not have solutions. I think we give solutions that even Kwame can use. Mr. Speaker, the honorable member, Mr. McCoy, can use. Mr. Speaker, all all that we have outlined is only possible if we have good governance. Mr. Speaker, Guyana today is marked by the absence of transparency and accountability. There's an unbelievable assault on democracy. For some reason, PPP seem to believe that democracy is only about elections. They do not believe that there are substantive elements of democracy, governance issues in which they should follow Article 13 and be inclusive. They had the audacity to tell even civil society that they were not elected and therefore they won't have a say. Mr. Speaker, modern democracies accommodate. Modern democracies accommodate civil society. Civil society is seen as an integral part of democratic development, but not so with us. We are deteriorating at a fast rate that we are now seeking to gerrymander boundaries, something that we haven't heard of since the 60s. Mr. Speaker, a clean voters list is critical to elections that all of us accept. And if the government believes, as it constantly says, that we can be over here for the rest of our lives, give us a clean voters list and put it to the test. You give us a clean voters list and put it to the test. Mr. Speaker, the assault on our freedoms and expression must come to an end. It is not part of democratic culture. Mr. Speaker, the politicization of the Guyana police force is anti-democratic and should come to an end. Mr. Speaker, we need independent public institutions that can act as a check and balance on the excesses of this government. Mr. Speaker, governance is a critical issue. And you can put how many proposals you want. If people do not believe they are involved, you will not succeed. Look at the amount of money you put in rice, and it failed and did worse than under us. Mr. Speaker, we have outlined the weaknesses of this budget. We have pointed out that it does not deliver poverty alleviation measures. We've shown you that it has no cost of living. It has no cost of living, no measures to reduce cost of living. We have shown you that it has no measures to create employment. Mr. Speaker, we have shown you that it does not focus on the development of our people. We recommend to you that you borrow from our people-centered vision and bring a budget that allows our people to develop. Mr. Speaker, this budget asphyxiates the poor man. This budget stifles the poor man. This budget kills initiative. It is for those reasons, Mr. Speaker, I can't afford to support this budget. However, if the government shows any responsibility and is prepared to be responsive to the concerns, we might very well reconsider our position. I want to thank you, Mr. Speaker, for this opportunity.
Thank you very, very much, Honorable Leader of the Opposition, the Honorable Member, Mr. Aubrey Norton. And now, to conclude the debate on the 2023 budget, the Honorable Senior Minister in the Office of the President, with responsibility for finance.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to conclude this first half of consideration by this Honorable House of Budget 2023. The first half, of course, focusing on the general policy debate in anticipation of the consideration of the estimates of expenditure next week. And as I do so, I thank all of my colleagues on this side of the House, and indeed the Honorable Deputy Speaker, for their various contributions, invaluable contributions, I add, to this debate. As is traditionally the case, ministers, members of parliament took advantage of the opportunity presented by this budget debate to elaborate in far greater detail than the budget speech can itself do our government's plans, policies, plans, and programs, and the various initiatives contained not only in the budget, but indeed in our manifesto, and how we complete delivery of our manifesto commitments during the course. Important part of the annual cycle and an important part of